Yeah, we talked about that. So why do people can?
It preserves things for much longer.
Yeah, sit a tomato out on the counter, and what, you got a week, maybe 2 at the most, right? With canning, we usually put a limit personally 2 years. It's best if you can do it in the first year, you know, because when the new tomatoes come on and you're canning those, then your old tomatoes, your year-old cans are being used up and you're starting with fresh. That's what we try to do, that rotation thing. But we'll go out to 2 years with things. Kind of glad we did it this last year because the pollinators it was really tough in the spring, as cold and as wet as it was, so we had no pears this year. Well, maybe I think we got 4, right?
4 pears.
Whereas last year we were able to can a whole mess of pears. So we kind of misered our pears over the year, and we still have some pears from last year, for example. But that's good. What are some other advantages of doing canning?
Preserving your harvest.
Yeah.
Big time.
It comes in all at once a lot of times, and what are you gonna? You can't eat it all.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's a good. So not letting it go to waste.
And I thought about too for like my restaurant. Sometimes we're just not busy, and I make these big pots.
Oh.
And then it's like I just don't want them to go to waste.
Oh.
And then I just feel like if I could can them,
Yeah.
then my jars, I could just open a jar and it's tiny, and I stopped losing so much money.
That's a really good. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really
so for
good.
me, that's a really high priority.
Okay, good. Anybody else advantages of canning?
You know what's in that jar.
There you go.
I like it. And if you can buy things at farmers markets and have a pretty good idea of the quality of the food that's going in there, but you can raise it yourself too, and then you know what you put in that soil and what made that plant grow. You look at the commercialization of our farming, and about the only nutrients that are in the foods that you get commercially are because they put them there, not naturally, put it that way.
I
Right?
heard you can even can flour.
People can all kinds of things with flour, sugar.
It just preserves
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Seems like
Any other advantages? How about disadvantages? Oh, one other advantage I wanted to mention is it's cooked. In canning, the food is actually getting cooked in the jar, right? So I know some people might not be meat eaters, but if you are a meat eater, that meat is cooked. So when you use it, all you have to do is warm it up. You don't have to go through the whole cooking process. Make some enchiladas with canned chicken, and boom, you're going right away. Yeah.
You can make enchiladas.
Ooh, yeah. Well, you'd have the chicken, and then you'd have the chicken cooked, and then you make food.
Yeah, I just thought of another advantage is like, with today's unknowns, like when there's shortages of food. It's true, I can't toilet paper, but anyway. but when there's shortages of food, because you just don't know, and today, with all this stuff happening, when there will be the next shortage and what it will be.
Yep. That's good.
Yeah.
stockpile.
Yeah, so like food security.
Yeah.
Food security, like
Yeah.
What any other disadvantages that come to mind?
Disadvantages or advantages?
Either.
You run out of space.
Yeah,
Shelf
right.
space.
Space and time.
Yeah.
Buy all glass jars.
Say that again?
You have to buy all the jars.
Yeah, you have to buy the jars, right?
And the lids were in short supply
The
a couple
lids were in
years
short
ago.
supply.
They were big time short supply.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
And now they're questioning the
Quality.
quality of a lot of lids.
Yeah, they are.
Are they?
Yeah.
Another thing with,
They're
oh,
not
go ahead.
selling-
I was going to say, some of the lids now, someone's measured them, they've got a narrower band.
Yeah.
The rubbery band that makes the suction happen is going to be as strong
And they're
as the
saying
old.
some are also thinner, so they buckle.
Oh.
So do you have to add the extra wax or something?
That's a good
Wax isn't
question.
gonna do it, I don't
You
think.
know, an extra.
No, it's just, you just have to
Wax
really,
wouldn't work with.
yeah.
Wax is for jams and
Yeah.
stuff, but it's not
And
for
it's got a
regular
really
canning.
hot sugar with jam.
Yeah.
Really, because I've done them without as much sugar. And they don't work.
stores and things, like they have lids that twist on and off, like the, you know, the kind the stores have. And those aren't like seal kind. Can a person can with those kind of lids?
There are those available, but they're really hard to find. If you watch YouTube videos, there are some people in like Eastern Europe that's how they can. They have the lids like what you, I don't have any here, what you are on some metal lid that they screw it on and it seals.
I watched that in Eastern family.
Yeah.
that does-
But there's one other kind too that is reusable. I forget what they're called. Brain.
With the rubber thing? That's another one.
It's on one of the canning Facebook pages.
Okay.
I can't remember what it's called. I want to say jewel, but that's not it. It's something that you can reuse multiple times.
I personally don't have any experience.
Yeah, I
with that.
don't either. I just have used, that's all that I've used. But I keep reading about it and it's like, you got to do special things too. So I don't know.
The other disadvantage that I can think of with canning in jars, we're in an earthquake zone. So you gotta be cognizant, it can't be just up on a shelf, it's gonna just sit there because it will slide off the shelf and then when you need it, it's gonna be gone. So all of our shelves that we have our canning jars on have a lip of wood in front of it, just something simple so nothing can come out. And they're so tight on each, they're actually sliding drawers that we use, and it's so tight on each other they can't tip over inside that space. Just things to think about. Cool. So canning, again, we talked about it's kind of for short term, 1 to 2 years. The food is viable longer than that. I mean, if you're in a dire straight hunger situation, the quality of it won't be as good, the taste won't be as good. But as long as that cap is still sealed, you're still okay, but we just try to use things up in 2 years. It's not long-term storage. We'll talk about long-term storage in another time, but there are things that you can store in certain ways that will last for 25 years and more. So, and we'll talk about that at another time. So canning, why does it work and how does it work? So the theory behind canning is let's just talk about hot water bath first, right? What's the boiling temperature of water?
212.
212 degrees there's always a caveat.
Sea level.
At sea level, right? So if I'm up at 4,000 foot elevation, is it higher temperature or lower temperature?
It's hard to get boiling in that high altitude, right?
It's actually, it's a lower temperature, the higher elevation you are. So it might boil at 210, 209, 208, depending on how high you are. Why is that important? When you take something to 212 degrees for a certain amount of time, and you'll hear me say it again and again, follow the recipe. Because every food they've done studies on, and it'll say hot water bath for 15 minutes, hot water bath for 30 minutes, pressure cook for 60 minutes, pressure cook for 90 minutes. It just depends on what it is. So, as the recipe goes, you keep it in the hot water bath at 212 degrees, it's boiling for a certain amount of time, and what that does is it kills all the bacteria and all the microorganisms that are in that food. Obviously cooks the food in the process. So now you got this jar, everything's dead in it, right? The microorganisms and the bacteria are dead. There's still spores from botulism that are in there. They don't get killed until it's 240 degrees. Botulism spores do not grow or give off any toxin in an acid environment. So if it's an acid environment that's got a pH of 4.6 or less, i.e. add some lemon juice to it, then the botulism spores can't grow, can't create the toxin, and to go with a hot water bath. But if you have a food that has a higher pH than a 4.6, meats, green beans, carrots, soup, possibly a fair amount of your leftovers, right? They're not going to be acidic enough so that that botulism spore doesn't give off the toxins and doesn't grow. So what do we got to do? We got to get it up past 140 or past 240 degrees. And that's what you do with the pressure canner. At 10 pounds of pressure, if this is at 10 pounds of pressure, the water in here doesn't boil until 240 degrees. It goes from 212 to 240. If you put 15 pounds of pressure on here, it goes up to 250 degrees. Go ahead.
So I don't get the pounds of pressure thing.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
So, you ride a bicycle or?
Yeah.
Okay. Bicycle tire, you're pumping in air in there. A lot of the bicycle tires, if you're in a mountain bike, it might be 35 pounds of pressure inside of it. A road bike, some of those are 110 pounds of pressure. So it's the amount of pressure that is felt on everything. We're in atmospheric pressure right now.
But how can you make it like 10 pounds or 15
Yeah.
pounds?
Good. So, can I answer that in a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get there. So does that make sense, the chemistry of canning and why we need to pressure can versus not? Once we kill those botulism spores at the 240 degrees for a long enough period of time, they can't give off any toxins anymore. They're done. And when our jars cool off in either method, it creates a vacuum. And the lid will seal around that rubber, the rubber area. It'll seal on the jar and not let any air in. New air into the jar means new bacteria into the jar. So that's the important thing that you're doing with sealing, is you're just keeping unsterilized air out of the jar. Once that's canned, it becomes a sterile environment inside and nothing's growing. Any questions on that? I always like to, it's always nice to learn why we do things and what it means. So let's see, just make sure. So if you're ever in a high altitude, make sure, if you're gonna can, it's cool to can in high altitude, but you just gotta make sure that they'll have caveats in the recipe books of, hey, if you're at 4,000 feet, you can't do it at 10 pounds of pressure. You got to do it at 15 pounds of pressure, for example, or for a longer duration. Types of jars. So these are just a few examples of the different jars. You know, you can start with a gallon jar. Obviously, for a hot water bath, you have to have a hot water bath canner that's big enough for a jar. In a hot water bath, you're totally covering the jars. Usually above the jar by about an inch. There's wide mouth jars, and then there's regular mouth jars. We kind of lean towards the wide mouth more because it's easier to get things in and out, but there is both. We really like these short squatty ones. This is also, all three of these are pints. Same size. Same volume, I should say. And then this is a half pint. This one we really like for, you know, it's just two of us now. Everything, when we had kids at home, everything was in quarts. Now we're to pints and half pints. And then there's the jelly ones. But these are all, you know, the same size. It's either the regular or the wide mouth jars. Always use a canning jar, a jar that was made for canning. Don't think you can go and take your mayonnaise jar or your Maricwood jar and use it for canning, because highly likely it will break on you. And breaking is no good. You always want to check the rim for nicks on your canning jars before you use them, every time. What happens if there's a little nick?
No seal.
Not gonna seal. Okay? Doesn't mean that that food's gonna be bad coming right out of the canner.
But it won't last.
It won't last. So you gotta put it in your fridge and eat it in the next couple days like you normally would for food that you cook. And you always wash and sterilize your jars. Well, Gene, I store mine upside down on the shelf. That should be good enough. No. This has been a spot where bacteria's been growing since it was empty, right? So we always run ours through the dishwasher on a hot cycle. And that usually does good. You can also put it in your oven. I don't remember what temperature for how long. You remember? But it's in the recipe book. And that'll sterilize your jars as well.
You can also do steam sterilization too.
Sure.
You could have a shallow pan of water boiling on the stove, and then you just invert your jar.
Oh.
And you just have it there, and it's kind of like a production line then, you know, whatever you're canning.
I just usually boil them. Is that not, steaming would be, I guess, less water, you wouldn't.
Oh, I'm sure you can boil them too. Yeah, it's
And then I've got,
super
because I
too.
just have it in there and the water's already getting hot for
Yep.
canning, so I guess.
There you go.
it's have-
Yeah, makes
But
sense.
yeah, I have heard of the oven thing, but I haven't tried that.
Yeah, as long as you just want it sterile. You always got to think, I don't want to introduce any more bacteria than there is in the natural world. You know, I'm going to always, there's bacteria all around us. We're going to get it in there anyways. But we want to be as careful as we can.
Yeah, but even with the oven or that steaming one that I said over the water, you're still starting out with a clean jar too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you're going to start with something that wasn't really washed really well.
Yeah. Good. Lids and rings, again, wide mouth and narrow or regular, and the rings. You can reuse the rings, but don't ever reuse the metal lids. It's Carol, right? Carol mentioned there are some lids that you can reuse. These aren't the kind.
They're not metal, the ones, and I wish I could.
I think they're like a plastic.
Could be. I just don't remember what. I've seen them mentioned multiple times. They're quite a bit more expensive, but you can use them.
Again and again.
Indefinitely.
Yeah.
So the
I've
rings
just
you
started
can-
researching that.
The rings you can reuse, you just want to watch them. You know, this one's probably getting towards the end of its life. It's starting to get some rust on it. And that just means you can't crimp it down as good as, or as smoothly as you would want to.
So on the lid itself, like I tend to use them to cover just to close things up because I use glass jars a lot even when I'm not
Yeah.
canning. Does that count as a use, or is it only once you boiled it for it to seal that it's a use?
I would not reuse one that I had used it for storage. I would not reuse it for canning, personally.
So use your
Yeah.
old canning ones for your storage.
There you go.
So that's what I save my old ones after I canned them.
But they've never been canned.
Yeah, well, you're kind of wasting a good canning one.
I
Is
know.
what, so
Once
the
you-
ones that you can, save those when you, after you use them, and use
Yep.
those for storage.
And
Okay.
then use those for storage.
Alright.
We've got a drawer of used canning lids, and with all of what they were scribbled out, you know, and then we use those.
And you also have the
And then you have
plastic
these
screw on.
as well that you can use for storing things. It's a plastic one. It has a little. This is not for canning. This is for after you open it. You can't eat it all.
Were you going to mention, and maybe I'm jumping ahead,
Go ahead.
once you're done canning and it's sealed and cooled, that you take the ring off?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't store your food with,
Yeah.
you don't store your
Yeah.
jars with the ring
If you
on.
take your ring off after it's done canning and after it's sealed, it's usually easier at that point to get it off. If you leave it on there, it has a tendency to rust because there's water underneath it, and you'll be fighting that, 6 months from now trying to get it off.
Yeah, the only exception for us is if we can't easily unscrew it, then we just,
Then we just leave it.
yeah, and doesn't that usually happen with beets? I think we usually have a couple jars but beets are so much sugary and sweeter that I think it just gets a little bit
Yeah.
syrupy under there.
Yep. And then from there, I kind of mentioned it before, but safe food practices. Everything's clean. Your cutting boards, your knives, your hands. You just don't want to introduce any extra things. And then there's hot and cold pack. Anybody know what that means? Carol?
Where sometimes you cook the stuff ahead of time, and then you also put the hot water in, and sometimes you start with cold everything, and then put the hot, and then can it. So there's, just depending upon what the recipe calls for and what you're canning.
Yep. So you think of salsa. Usually salsa you cook up ahead of time. There are some recipes that are cold pack salsa, but most of the time they're, you pre-mix all the ingredients, taste it, yeah, this tastes really good. And then you're hot, it's hot going into the jar. That's what hot pack means. Cold pack is when you're putting cold food in. So I might fill this up with green beans that are cold, pour some boiling water over it to bring it up to the right headspace area, put my salt in, cover it, and that's it.
Is there anything that you could can? Like, I always fall asleep at that many stirring people before they get to the part I want to see. But I see them, you can do fresh strawberries in a jar, and they just put the fresh strawberries in, put the thing on, and then they do something. Do they stay raw, fresh? It says keep your strawberries fresh for...
Not canning.
They're gonna cook.
They might be making a kefir or something out of it, perhaps.
But if you're canning, it's gonna boil for so many minutes, it's gonna get cooked.
But it seems like I keep reading about some things that stay raw. I gotta stay awake.
Yeah. So the canning is going to be cooking everything.
Canning and cooking, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so hot water bath. So there's a lot of different hot water bath cans. You could just use a regular pot on the stove, if you only had one jar you wanted to do. But this is a hot water bath canner. I like these. It lets you put your jars in here and then put them all in at once. And you're not dipping your hands in the hot water. Same thing for getting them out. Have a little rack. And it also protects the jars aren't sitting right next to the flame or the electric coil on the bottom. So keeps them up. So you start off with you start heating this up, and you kind of guess how much water you need to have in here, because you're going to want to, like I mentioned before, you're going to want to cover your jars completely, but your jars are going to take up space, so that you'll be able to figure it out after you do it once or twice, how much water you need to start with, and you can get that going. If you're cold packing, you don't want this water completely hot right away, because if you're putting your cold into your hot water, there's a tendency that they could crack. So you would start off with them warm, but not hot. If you're hot packing food, you can start off with hot water and get this to a rolling boil, and then put your jars in. If that makes sense.
So then if you're cold packing, the time of processing is once it starts boiling to that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure I was doing it right.
Yeah. Your timer doesn't start until this is a rolling boil, i.e. 212 degrees.
For hot pack or cold pack. It's for
both.
anything, yeah.
Thank you.
So does it matter the temperature of the day as well? Like you can't in winter versus
No.
summer? No.
That won't affect the temperature of this water.
Oh, yeah.
A good question. We usually have a tea kettle going. This is Jan's favorite tea kettle. Have that full of water, because if by chance you didn't fill this enough, you got some boiling water you can put in instead of cold water from the tap. Now you gotta wait again. Okay? Also, hot water goes on your lids. And so I have lids, and I don't stack them right on top of each other. I kind of scatter them side by side. And then it works if you have a magnet. You can pick up a lid. Now I'm not contaminating a sterilized lid with my fingers, and I can put it on the jar after it's full.
Do you use apple cider vinegar around the rim, or is that?
We don't, but we do after we use a funnel. So I'm trying not to contaminate the rim at all, but it happens, And so I will, after I fill it up as far as it needs to go, the recipe will tell you how much headspace you need. It's usually to the neck of the jar. You don't want to have a lot of air, because again, air is your enemy, because it has the bacteria. You want to get, that air will come out as you're canning. So after you're done putting your food in, then we usually have a moist paper towel, and we just wipe around the rim like that really good and make sure it's totally clean. Because if there's a tomato seed on there, it's not going to seal.
One question on the lids. So you don't need to boil them anymore, just hot water?
We put boiling water on.
But you don't have to boil them in
It's
a...
boiling there. And
pour it on, but it doesn't have to boil in a pot for a certain amount of time.
We don't.
I just keep hearing different things, so I just wanted to...
Okay. That's our practice. See where I'm at. Yeah, you mentioned time starts when the water in the canner comes to boiling, and you got to keep it boiling. You know, you can turn it down a little bit so it simmers, but if you turn it down too far, and it was supposed to go for 15 minutes, then you got to crank the heat again. When it comes back up to boiling, you don't subtract out the 5 minutes that it was already doing. You got to do 15 minutes again, because in that little bit of time, something said, "Ooh, I got to populate because they're killing me," you know, and you don't want to do that. And then once you're done, once it's done with its time, you can, out of a hot water bath, you can take them out right away. And they make these little things because they're going to be 212 degrees. So you use these to take the jars out of the canner. And it's usually best to store them on a rack, like a cookie rack or something like that if you have it. Or you could have a dish towel put out. You want to have air between your jars when they're cooling. So you don't want them touching each other when they're cooling. You want at least an inch of airspace so that the air can cool it off uniformly. And then once they're starting to cool, you should start hearing pops. And that's the lid going down to seal. The lid is concave in the beginning, but when it pulls a vacuum as things cool, it'll pop down. You'll hear that. And we always go, "Yay!" Gotta have a little celebration. A lot of work. You think about all the work, gardening, the weeding, the compost pile building, finally getting in the jar. Celebrate a little bit, right?
You don't have to put it upside down.
Well, the recipes, you'll see people doing that on YouTube. The recipes actually recommend you don't put it upside down. So we go with that. And then make sure, obviously, that you label the contents and date it. Use a Sharpie. Write it neatly. I'm not the best penmanship, so you're wondering, is that pears or is that something else? So do it that way. Any questions on water bath? Okay, now we go into pressure canning. Pressure canning. So the first thing you do with pressure canning is you inspect everything. So we have a seal, a ring that seals, and these will, over time, wear out. They'll get stiff, they'll get brittle, and you can just purchase another one. They'll last for years and years and years and years, but we've twice have had to purchase new ones for these, I think.
So it's mostly if it just gets hard, if you see a crack, it's kind of...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just, make sure it's still pliable and good. They're not.
And we had noticed that it was taking a long time
Oh,
for the
seal
pressure to
wasn't
build
sealing,
up,
seal
so it
wasn't-
just wasn't sealing.
Okay.
So
There's also a safety valve on these that, you can buy these at rummage sales. Some people have them from their parents and blah, blah, blah. If the safety seal is bad, you can get another one. This is a piece of metal. I don't know what kind it is. I'd have to research that. But it's a type of metal that has a lower lower melting temperature than aluminum does. So then that will melt if you run out of water and it's still on the stove for a long, long time. So things don't happen. This will release.
So how do you tell if that is bad, or do they just?
You'll be able to see a hole.
Oh, okay, okay, that makes it real,
Yeah.
that's my fear there, is that I don't have that part together.
Yep, no worries. And then the one other thing that I always look at, there's a handle lock. So when pressure, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but see this thing right here? When pressure builds up, that'll go in, and this little knob comes out of the handle.
Okay.
It's going to be a similar thing on other pressure canners. So as this goes up, pressure, then the handle lock comes down. So that doesn't let you open it up when it's still under pressure, right? So double check that. I'm sure there's probably a little bit different design in other canners. There are canners that have dials on them and things like that, but same concept. This one uses a weight. So I'm going to want to, the last thing I'm going to want to do is make sure I can see through that hole that's in the middle where the steam needs to come out. So if I look real close, I can see it. And then this one has a weight that has 3 poundages on it. 5, 10, and 15. So as I put a 15 on here and put it under the put a fire under it, and I have a little bit of water in there, that water is going to boil off and become steam, right?
So you turn that to 15?
I put the 15 is down on here.
Okay, I think so. So how?
No, that's fine. You're good.
So, oh, okay, I see. Okay.
So each one of these little openings is designed to let a certain amount of steam off at a certain pressure. So once that water is boiling inside here, i.e. 212 degrees, right? We're at 0 psi, 0 pounds of pressure, and that steam doesn't have anywhere to go. Because we're sealed in, this weight's on it, there are no openings, but it's still boiling. And it'll build up pressure, and that steam will build up pressure and build up pressure and build up pressure until it reaches a point where there's 15 pounds of pressure in this pressure cooker, and this will lift up and it'll go psst, and then it'll go back down. And then a little bit later, if you keep the flame on, it'll go psst, and it'll go back down. So you wait until that goes up and down 3 or 4 times in a minute, then you're knowing you're at the right pressure. If all of a sudden it's and it doesn't go back down, then you turn your flame down a little bit. Because it's trying to release the pressure all the time. You're building up. Okay?
Does it ever send it flying?
No.
Okay.
It just lifts it up a little bit. It'll that was exaggerated. It'll go about that high. It'll go psst.
So if it keeps going if it stays up, then you can just turn it down.
Yeah, if you hear the rattle, it'll be like that. Then you turn your burner down a little bit, just like as if, that's boiling way too hard, I just need to simmer it. Same
So
thing.
you just want it to go up, down just a few times. You don't want it constantly.
3 to 4 times in a minute.
Okay.
Yep,
Oh, but that'll continue happening at that rate, and that's normal.
for the total time, yeah.
Yep,
Yep.
and sometimes that jiggle is like for 10 seconds. It'll go,
Yep,
and then it'll be quiet, and then.
But if it stays constant. then
But if it
goes,
keeps going like
turn
that,
it
then you
down.
know you
just
need to
turn it down a
adjust.
little bit.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, we might have got ahead of ourselves, but that's good. And one thing I didn't mention, in a pressure canner, you don't fill this up all the way. It doesn't need to cover the jars. The pressure, the water, this is going to be a weird concept to think about, but this is how it is. The water is 212 degrees. The steam is what's 240 or 250 degrees. Okay? So you don't want this totally submerged in water. You only put an inch or two of water in the pressure can.
2 quarts.
2 quarts, okay.
Yep.
And this one?
In that size pressure cooker.
Yeah. And that will come with any pressure.
And it'll give you how much, it'll tell you depending on the size of the cooker.
There you go. Time starts when it jiggles 3 or 4 times a minute. That's when your time starts, just like you start your timer when it's boiling. Start your timer when it's jiggling 3 or 4 times. Any questions on the process of getting it going?
So do you, the same amount of like finger tightening of the lids either way? Okay.
Yep.
Yep, and you never really have to screw the lid on super hard. You're just doing snug.
Why?
So it can release the air.
So that it can do its job when it's going through the processing.
Yep. When that jar's in the heat, it's letting the air out of it. Because everything's expanding in that jar, so it's letting the air out, right? So if you have that lid on there, you'll crank it on, give it to my teenage son and crank it, it might not be able to let the air out. So you don't want it super tight when you put it in here. Go ahead.
And then just another point, with care of your canner, we've had that canner for 40 years.
Yeah.
To keep it from pitting, and that can happen with aluminum with a lot of use, you put like a teaspoon of cream of tartar in it.
In the water while you're.
In the water.
While it's.
So it just
Yes.
neutralizes. But I don't know, every canner will tell you what to do to maintain it and keep it nice. So I mean, that canner's been really good to us. I don't even know if they make that kind of canner anymore.
Yeah, there's stainless steel ones nowadays too and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So with a pressure canner, you don't take your jars out right away, right? When the time is done,
That's another good point. Make sure you have your lid on correctly, and
you know, I'm gonna get it all meshed up here.
I think you
I
gotta,
went too far.
turn the handle the other way.
Here. I went the wrong
There you
way.
go. There you go.
I should read the notes and say open, close right there. So this is under pressure, right? I turn my time is done. I turn my flame off. Now what?
It's still under pressure, you gotta wait.
Still under pressure, right? This
Leave it
may
alone.
not be lifting off and going anymore because there's not 15 pounds of pressure in it anymore, but there might be 14.
So do you take that off or you wait till the whole thing cools down to take off the?
You wait until it cools off.
So
You
you-
could move it to a non-hot spot of your stove if you want. We have a gas stove. We just turn the gas off.
But you leave the pressure thing on top, you don't
Yes.
take that off neither.
No, you don't take that off. What is
That was my question.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
you leave this on
It's called a natural release.
and you let it naturally cool off. And you'll reach a point when it's under pressure, I can see, if I look through here, I'll be able to see that handle lock down. And I would look, oh, the handle lock's not down there anymore. That's cool. So, and then I can grab this will still be hot, right? And I'll grab maybe a knife or just something like this, and I'll just tap this. And if it goes, I'll wait a little bit longer because it might have 2 pounds of pressure in it. But once I grab that and nothing happens, then it's to atmospheric pressure, and I can open it. And then I can take my jars out and do the same thing, and you'll hear the little pops, and you celebrate.
Yeah. And chances are it's still really hot.
It's gonna be still real. It'll be 209 degrees, right? Always when you open these, don't open them this way. Open them away from you. Now it'll it'll still be hot water and steam coming up, right? So open it away from you. It's not like it's not gonna blow up on you when you undo it because you've already made sure of that, right? Yeah. So there's that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think I've read somewhere, like, you know, sometimes like you mentioned this jar is breaking. If you're canning something hot, like I always say to keep your jar hot, how, like, do you just keep it in hot water until you're ready to?
Yeah, we personally run the dishwasher and leave them in the dishwasher,
Okay.
so they're hot,
And then you
and
just.
they come right to the table, you put stuff in. You can have it in your oven, comes right out, and you put it in.
Yeah.
Or in another thing of water, boiling, take them out of there and put it in.
I was doing a load and then I take them out, they cool down before the hot stuff got hot,
Yeah.
and I have to put them back in again.
Yeah.
When there's, so, well, I guess you don't tighten the lids, yeah, like, cause you're taking the lids off, never mind, I just
Yep.
thought that through.
Yeah, when they're totally out, and then when these have popped down and they're cooled off, they become room temperature, then we take our lids off. And like Jan said, if it's something that's, I gotta really be cranking on it to get it off, then we'll just leave the lid on and we'll deal with that when we open it. And if something doesn't seal for some reason, you know, there might be a little flake of sand there or whatever, it's still good stuff. Put it in your fridge or use it right there. You know, just use it like a normal thing that you cook.
Or you can do the processing again.
But
What's
within
that?
24 hours, right?
What'd you say?
Or you can do the processing again.
Yeah, you would put a new lid on it.
Clean
Yeah.
it in.
I think the thing we found most common when we've had a jar that doesn't seal is that we've had it packed too high. So like maybe there was a green bean a little too high. And so when it was trying to suck down the lid, the green bean interfered with allowing it to, or green beans, I'm sure there was more than one,
Yeah.
too high, so that it wouldn't let the lid come down.
One thing I didn't mention, I just thought of, usually like with green beans and things like that, you're pouring hot water over them, or there's other things like pears. We use grape juice as the liquid for pears because we don't care for the extra, sugar syrup. You can make it with sugar syrup, but you just make sure that everything is covered with the liquid. You don't usually want a corner of a pear sticking out. Another thing I didn't say is that, like, let's say I got this totally packed with green beans in here. I want to make sure I get as much air out as I can. And there is going to be little air bubbles that are stuck on those bottom green beans or in between each other and stuff like that. So we'll use a knife and move around a little bit, and you'll see the bubbles float up. So that's important to do.
With any item?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that's packed in the liquid.
But not like jam.
What's that?
Not like jam.
Jam, you probably wouldn't have air bubbles. You want to make sure no air bubbles are in it. So if you put a spoonful of jam in there, there could be air bubbles in the bottom. So you do want to get that out. Yeah.
So sometimes when I pack things in really tight, and it seems like they're good, by the time they're processed, they're floating. Is that just because I didn't get enough in, or is it just part of that it just happens?
Part of the process. Yeah. Like you'll see our pears. They have a little. They're exposed a little bit. Not too
Yeah,
bad.
no, this is like they float to the top, and it'll be like this amount of liquid in the bottom, but that's just,
That's just
it's not because I didn't pack it tight
Yeah.
enough, it's just the way.
No. I get that when I do raw packed tomatoes. But
Yeah.
sometimes you just want the whole tomato instead of having it hot pack and cooked through.
Pickles I've gotten it a couple times.
Pickles I have happened too.
One of the cool things that I like to do in canning is chicken. And you can have whole roosters that are really tough in just about any other way, but when you pressure can a chicken, we usually cold pack it, and then all of that, the goodness, the liquid, the broth
The broth.
from the chicken is right in there.
Can you leave the bone on? Or?
Yeah. So all that would,
That's all
be like the bone broth and everything. It's some of the best flavorful stuff you ever had, as far as that's concerned. You can can a lot of things, and maybe let me just cover the things to watch out for, and then we can just kind of have a round robin of what things you like to can. Simon, so you can something, the lid's sealed, blah blah blah, and now it's sitting on your shelf, and you go to it. There are certain signs to watch for. It's kind of common sense stuff, but if it's when in doubt, throw it out. Is the old saying. So if the lid that was down is now up, if you can click on that lid and it goes on the can, it's going out. It goes into the compost pile, right? If there's bulging on the lid, even more, just like a regular can, you wouldn't ever eat a bulging can, because there's stuff growing in there that are giving off, it's fermenting, it's giving off CO2 and stuff like that. If you look at your cans or your jars and there's mold on the inside, that would be a good sign to not use it. We're not making penicillin here, right? Leaking jars, that's kind of another sign. Obviously, if you have a leaking jar, the seal will be blown. So I can go on all of these and they don't go click, 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 right? You don't hear that at all. These are all under a vacuum still. And then something badly discolored, you wouldn't use as well. So.
We find that with beets.
Yeah,
And
beets
if beets get to be 2 years, it's just,
they get kind of pale. The water gets redder, but the beet itself
but the beet is kind of leached.
it leaches out. So what are some things that you guys like to can, or would like to can, or have seen canned, or
I love to can soups.
soups?
Yeah.
There's tomato soup right there. Jan made it. Oh, really good. I've done other types of soups as well.
But you can't do like cream of, you can't do like chowder or
The only thing that I know that they suggest you don't can anymore is like pureed squash.
Or
like,
pumpkin.
Like pumpkin squash, pumpkin puree of pumpkin. So you can do a pumpkin pie right away. You can can it if it's cubed, or like mashed potatoes. I would think cream of something would be okay. I would look for a recipe for it. I bet you'll find it. Because they sell canned cream soups, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see why that. But what they found with the pureed squash and pumpkin, it used to be in the books. It might still be in some of these old ones, but recently they found that center core is so insulated that it doesn't heat up enough to kill stuff.
Like even like taco meat and things like that.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah, get them gears turning, man.
I've got to make my batches for the month.
Make a batch for a month, can it up, and you're good. Because all you gotta do is heat up taco meat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chorizo.
Yep. Use up your green tomatoes. You want a lot of that? Go ahead.
Periodically, I have jars that break.
Okay.
What causes that?
A defect in the glass. It got mishandled during transportation. Either the factory or you while you're moving it to a cupboard or something like that.
So it's the jar itself that's most likely.
Yeah, it could be it's not really from the process because they're made to handle.
Okay, yeah,
heat
it's
and
just
stuff. There's something.
it's like you look, oh my God, there's stuff
Yeah.
floating.
So there's a point that maybe goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways. If you have a broken jar, don't try to scoop out the stuff and use it. Right? It's probably got shards of glass in there that you don't want in your belly.
Okay, so
Just have to say it.
Okay, yeah, I just always curious. Periodically it happens. And it's like,
It does.
What did I do?
Yeah.
It's not me, it's the jar. Okay.
Yeah, it's a defect in the jar.
See, I think that's what happened when my jars broke. We did it in like October when we were canning apple, we got apples in Preston or whatever, apple juice, and we just left the cans out in the cold air, and then we just put them straight into the boiling water.
That'll do it.
Yeah, I think that's what.
And I broke a jar the other night. I was saying that I can't find my little can rester thing.
Yeah.
And so I put a washcloth down at the bottom of my pot, which is like I heard was a good desperate solution. But I think my last can that I put in didn't actually land on the washcloth. I think it was right on the pot bottom, and I think
I
that must have
bet.
done something
Direct
to it.
heat.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. What are some other things that we like we really like beets. And there's pickled beets and there's regular beets. We like the pears that we can off of our trees. Jan did a spiced pear, so it's got a little more zip to it. There's a salsa. We have a secret salsa recipe that we're not supposed to share, but that's really good.
And which we can't share, unfortunately. And which we can't share.
Cantaloupe marmalade. When I lived in Alaska, that was one of my favorite jams. It was
Oh,
so
wow.
good.
Yeah.
Taking I don't remember all of it, but taking a ripe cantaloupe and you add some orange juice, fresh squeezed orange juice to it, and just let it cook and till
That's
it
an
bubbles
Alaska
and it's
thing?
thick and it's
You
so.
wouldn't think cantaloupe in Alaska.
I lived in Fairbanks for 10 years.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm just saying that you think of cantaloupe as a
It was
hot
like
crop.
Oh,
and
out
it's-
there and the cantaloupe, I'm still thinking of that jam. It was
Wow.
That's good.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any secret loves?
Just garden
Things they
stuff. But now that that's what I want to get into, so I can
Yeah.
preserve more of my vegetables, because I can't water bath them, but there's just been that little.
Yeah, they're in that window. And if you ever have a question, again, is it acidic enough to can? Look at the recipe, they'll tell you. And we do have a tool library on island where you can check out canners and things like that. So if you don't own a pressure canner, you can go to the tool library and I can't remember how they do it, if they have a suggested donation for like a
I
little
think they do,
rental.
or
it's-
there's a membership. I think they've changed it a little bit
Yeah.
over the years, and I
I don't know what it is right now, but I know they had canners in the past. Let's just
But
say
usually
that.
the canning season, I hear that they're very high demand, so you may
Right.
not be able to.
Yeah. And I'll just say this, Jan and I are canning all the time, and if anybody ever wants to, give us a holler and say, hey, next time you're throwing something in the pressure canner, let me come and watch the process or help you with it, or I've got this stuff I want to get canned. If we do it together, we'll give you a quarter of it, or however that goes.
How long does it take? Like how many, let's say pint jars, how many pint jars can you put in there at once? And from start to finish, when you're using the pressure thing, to letting it cool down where you can touch it again,
Yeah.
how long is it a gap between batches?
Again, it depends on what you're doing. I think raw chicken cold pack is 90 minutes
Okay.
under pressure. So there's an hour and a half. Doesn't take a whole lot of time to put it in there.
Right.
And how many pints can you put in this? Do you remember? I don't think.
7 wide mouth, 10 regular,
Wow.
Pints.
for pints.
Okay.
There are some that are like, somehow I wound up with a much taller one, so you
Yeah,
can actually put
you can
2 racks
stack.
in it.
There's a double
Yeah.
stack.
So
Yeah.
for those, do you need to have more water, or does it?
You have
Just
to
the
look
same-
at the
It'll
book,
tell you.
the instruction
It'll-
book
Okay,
will
there's
tell
no
you.
It's in
book
that.
with it, so I could go online.
Maybe
and
try
get some
looking
fun.
online.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
That's, it's just,
Yeah.
I got this from somebody, and it's like,
Our church used to have a big commercial canner that they did tomato products over in Puyallup area,
Kent.
Kent.
Was it a Kent?
And they did it in cans, but it was crazy how big that pressure canner was. There'd be 100, 150 cans and
Wow.
everything all at once, cranking away. And same process.
So you can any raw meat?
And canned salmon.
Yeah, it's it opens up all these possibilities. Anything that you would normally want to have cooked meat in, i.e. a taco or a, enchilada or.
So I can can ribs and then smoke them once I want to open it?
Good. I would want to do a couple of them because it's going to be super tender after you canned it. But you could can it inside of a jar that has the barbecue sauce and all that goodness
Or
in
should I
there.
smoke it first and then can?
I've had canned smoked salmon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think you'd
Experiment.
maybe smoke it first and then can it, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the meat would be too tender to try to smoke it after,
After.
Yeah. Be super
I would
tender.
think.
Anybody have any other questions or comments, or?
Oh, well, are the jars there to explain like the Campbells and stuff?
Yeah.
Is that to explain how it's done differently in mass production, or?
It's just to show you that anything that you see in a can,
Mhm.
you should be able to do yourself.
Oh,
That was the whole example.
okay.
You want to make some chicken noodle soup? Canned chicken noodle soup. Not a high acid,
Mm.
so we're going to have to use a pressure can.
Mhm.
And then
Is that why they
you
add
can-
citric acid to everything?
Well, or lemon juice, yeah.
Could be.
So some things, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can use the hot water bed?
Oh.
Would
Yeah.
the noodles be all al dente or?
Yeah, you'd have to do
So-
all that into. You want
So,
to.
yeah, that's one of the trickier things,
Yeah.
is canning pasta. I don't even bother.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can the broth
And the meat and then.
and
just
can
add
the
those.
meat, and
Yeah.
then we make our homemade noodles anyway and just
Mhm.
put them in.
And then add it to that, and
Yeah.
10 minutes later you got boom,
Yeah.
nice water. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good. And we'll post this on YouTube. You can share it with everybody.
So you'll, on